In this slide session, I want to go through some of the main concepts surrounding virtual reality. So we already talked a bit about the definition of virtual reality and the main components of what makes a virtual reality system. But let's now talk a bit about related concepts. And in this first part, we will talk about virtual worlds and virtual environments, interactivity, immersion, and presence. And so let's talk about virtual worlds and virtual environments. So what is a virtual world? Well, it's basically is the designed world that runs in the computer. Laval, for example, says that the real world refers to the physical world that contains the user at the time of the experience, and the virtual world refers to the perceived world as part of the targeted virtual reality experience. So in essence, virtual world is the designed world that runs in the computer, as opposed to the real world, which is the one we are currently in. So it's a basically straightforward definition. Another definition of virtual world is by Sherman and Craig, and they say virtual world is an imaginary space often manifested through a medium, or as an alternative, a description of a collection of objects in a space and the rules and relationships governing those objects. So you can see in this definition, it actually allows virtual worlds to exist beyond virtual reality. So if you think of a virtual world as imaginary space, it can be something that could be described in a book, for example. So here, this definition of virtual world is not so much coupled with virtual reality. It's just something that has a set of rules, has objects, probably has characters, and it's something that it's imagined and is described somewhere. But in the context of virtual reality, we'll mainly talk about virtual world as the thing that we can experience when we put on a headset or some other virtual reality equipment, and virtual world refers to that we see and hear and otherwise experience. Now, there's also often the expression virtual environments, and I personally prefer to use virtual environments. And this can be thought of as a synonym to virtual world. I prefer this term, virtual environment, because an environment to me can be thought as being something smaller, less complex than the virtual world. But you can use whatever expression you prefer. They usually mean the same thing. However, just a few notes that are important to mention. First is the expressions virtual worlds or virtual environments are used even when not talking about virtual reality. Okay, as I said, a virtual world is often used just to designate an imaginary space. And this could mean, for example, an imaginary space within a desktop game or a mobile game, not necessarily a virtual reality experience. A second note is that in some situations, virtual world is used to mean virtual reality, but only a specific type of virtual reality, in which this virtual world is completely synthetic. It's completely invented. In summary, we can think of virtual world, virtual environments as being the same thing, as being synonyms. But depending on the source, if you read a particular book, for example, they can have slightly different meanings. And it's also important to note that they have meaning outside of virtual reality. So they can have a completely different meaning depending on the context. Another pair of concepts important to virtual reality is that of interactivity and agency. And interactivity basically refers to the response of the virtual environment to the user's actions. So while we are inside the virtual reality environment, we act upon that environment, and if the environment responds, if the environment changes in reaction to our actions, then we have an interactive environment. And of course, interactivity is it's a fundamental aspect of virtual reality. So we often want to create interactive virtual reality environments. And if you remember, if you refer back to one of the definitions of virtual reality, interactivity was part of the definition. So it was mandatory for it to be considered virtual reality. So interactivity means that somehow the user is able to influence what happens inside that virtual environment. Because if it is interactive, then I do something, I change the environment, and it responds back. Of course, the frontier of what means to be interactive is not very clear. For example, if you imagine one of those 360 photos that you can see while wearing a headset, a virtual reality headset, would it be considered interactive? So something to think about. Is a 360 photo or video interactive? The environment seems to respond. For example, it responds to our head movements, because as we move our heads, we change the perspective and we see a different part of the photo. But that's very, very basic, right? So some people might not consider that as being interactive. Okay, so the threshold of what is considered interactive or not is not objectively defined. If you think back to this 360 photo example, and you think about an experience, fully real experience, when you are in a movie theater and you also move your head to see the whole screen. Maybe it's a very big screen and you're very close to it. You need to move slightly your head to be able to watch different parts of the screen. And so we might ask, is that different from moving our heads inside a 360 degrees photo? So some questions, I don't have definite answers to this. I think each one of us needs to draw his own threshold lines about what is considered enough interactivity or not. But again, something interesting to think about. Another concept is that of agency. And one definition of agency is given by Sherman and Craig. And they say agency refers to how much a participant perceives themselves to be a part of and have influence in that world. So again, this is similar to interactivity, and actually you would not be able to have any agency if the virtual environment was not interactive. But it's not quite the same thing. Being interactive does not guarantee that the participant has agency over that virtual environment. For example, even if we considered a 360 photo or video to be interactive, if we considered moving our head as being part of an interaction, that does not mean that we have agency inside that 360 video. Because I still know that I'm kind of an outsider and I'm just watching a movie, I'm just viewing a photo. I'm not really a part of the environment that is being depicted by that photo or video. So I don't have any agency. I cannot influence anything meaningful in that photo or video. So agency is more about the meaning of an interaction within the virtual environment. Then it's not just about being interactive, it's about what does it mean? What does a particular interaction mean inside that virtual environment? And agency is actually, just as a side note, is actually an important theme. It's often discussed within the computer gaming community that try to create games where the user feels or has agency over that the gaming world. And there are lots of discussions about what is agency and what are the limits and what is considered agency or not, and how to create a sense of agency in users. So it's kind of a complex concept that we are just touching on the surface here. But again, it's something that's also important to consider, and particularly to think about interactivity on the one hand and agency on the other hand. Another very, very important concept in virtual reality is that of immersion. And immersion can have, again, depending on the context, it can have different meanings. Often in virtual reality, when we talk about immersion, we're talking about simply physical immersion. And you see, for example, that Sherman and Craig, so that second book that I've mentioned already often, they define immersion as the sensation of being in an environment. And they distinguish between physical immersion and mental immersion. And so they say that it can be a purely mental state or can be accomplished through physical means. So physical immersion is a defining characteristic of virtual reality. Mental immersion is a principal goal of most media creators and also of virtual reality. So what does this mean? Physical immersion, if we consider only physical immersion, that's basically has to do with the number and the quality of the senses that are being hijacked, that are being controlled by the computer system, and the quality of that hijack. Whether you can still, for example, hear things from the outside, or whether you are using a very high quality audio system that blocks all outside noise. And something similar for the vision, whether you're using a headset that allows you to only see what is being displayed the headset, or whether the headset allows some light, for example, some outside lights to bleed in to your eyes. So physical immersion in virtual reality is often associated with the quality of the hardware and the number of senses that you are trying to simulate. And if we think only about physical immersion, we can easily compare systems, different virtual reality systems. The one you are seeing on the picture is called the cave. Cave is just a shorthand for cave automatic virtual environment. And caves are usually, they basically consist of projections, usually on 4 walls, sometimes just 3 walls, just as you see in the picture. Sometimes also projection on the ceiling and on the floor, so it depends. But it's basically a small room with projections all around you. And so this is one way to experience a virtual reality. It's in a kind of way, it's a kind of similar to the holodeck in Star Trek, but not as perfect as in that series. So this is one way to experience virtual reality. Of course, it's easy to understand that in this case, the one in the picture, the user can just, if he looks up, he will see something that has nothing to do with the virtual environment he's in. So he'll be able to see all the devices and the projectors that are just part of the real world, but not, they are not part of the virtual environment. Another way, if you had that technology, would be the holodeck. So I won't show you the clip again, but in the holodeck, when the user is there and the simulation is running, it's impossible to see anything from the real world. The computer controls everything, controls every perspective that you see. So you don't see any cables, you don't see devices, etc. So you only see, you only experience the virtual environment. So from the physical immersion point of view, the holodeck is kind of perfect. Obviously, it's science fiction. And it's much more immersive than the cave system. So physical immersion has mostly has to do with the hardware that you are able to use. The mental immersion is actually a synonym for presence or sense of presence, which is another concept in virtual reality. So here there are just 2 ways of referring to the same thing. So mental immersion is the sense of presence that we may get inside the virtual environment. So again, definitions from Sherman and Craig. Presence is just a shorthand for the sense of presence. So the feeling, a feeling of being inside a virtual environment. It's the same as being mentally immersed. So the sense of presence is a mental state. I'm so sorry, you should be hearing some kind of loud noise. It's an alarm nearby that I have no control over. Hopefully it will disappear in a moment or so. I hope you can still understand me. But so the sense of presence is a mental state. But although it is a mental state, it is something that does not depend only on the user. So of course I may try setting myself, if I'm inside a virtual environment, I may try to ignore, let's say, the virtual environment and I may try to set myself in a mental state that facilitates my sense of being present or being mentally immersed in that environment. But often this doesn't happen. So often I feel more or less present in a virtual environment, depending on the characteristics of that virtual environment and of the virtual reality system that I'm using. And this includes interactive features. So basically everything that we design in a virtual environment will somehow influence the sense of presence that users get inside that environment. Let's see a couple of examples. I'll just show you another clip from The Matrix.
The Matrix is a system, Neo. That system is our enemy. But when you're inside, you look around, what do you see? Businessmen, teachers, lawyers, carpenters, the very minds of the people we are trying to save. But until we do, these people are still a part of that system, and that makes them our enemy. You have to understand, most of these people are not ready to be unplugged. And many of them are so inert, so hopelessly dependent on the system, that they will fight to protect it. Were you listening to me, Neo? Or were you looking at the woman in the red dress? I was... Look again. Freeze it.
This isn't the Matrix.
No. It's another training program designed to teach you one thing. If you are not one of us, you are one of them.
What are they?
Sentient programs.
Okay, I'll stop here. I think this is enough. So in this virtual reality, so in the Matrix, it's fairly obvious that users are mentally immersed in that virtual environment. And even if in this clip, so Neo, until everything freezes, he thinks he's inside the Matrix. So everything for him feels natural. So he feels like he's a part of that environment. And it's easy to see why. So everyone, everything in the environment resembles a real environment, a real location on the real world. So everything acts, behaves as it should in reality. So the quality of the virtual reality system in this case is optimal. So it's able to simulate every aspect of reality to the point that people really think they are in a real environment. So they are completely mentally immersed in that environment. Now we can compare this to the virtual reality in Johnny Mnemonic. I'll just show you again very quickly to remember.
Password enter. Welcome to VRT Online. Global net selected. What are you doing?
Making a long-distance phone call. Beijing Hotel.
I'll stop here, it's enough. And so clearly it's easier to feel present in the Matrix example than in this one in the Johnny Mnemonic movie. Because if you think about it, in Johnny Mnemonic, so in this clip you just saw, the environment is completely abstract. And it doesn't seem fit for a human. It doesn't seem like it's something that a human would inhabit. So you would hardly feel mentally immersed or mentally present in this environment, in this abstract information space in Johnny Mnemonic. So these two examples clearly, I think, demonstrate a good example of a virtual environment and a virtual reality system that would induce the sense of presence, and another one that would not. And this, so this ends this first part of these concepts.